How's it going, guys? Tommy from West Central 1000. Today is August 25th, 2020, and today we'll primarily talk about Hurricane Laura now, which is currently spiraling around the Gulf of Mexico since Tropical Depression Marco has dissipated at this point. So let's get into it by first looking at the composition of this storm, and you could see it's fairly well organized. It isn't the most organized hurricane in the world at this point. It doesn't look like a picture perfect hurricane like you'd imagine with a well-defined eye in the middle and a huge and pretty much huge clouds around it. However, it's definitely showing signs that it's definitely organizing, and it's organizing very rapidly because over the last several loops, we've been seeing a little bit more convection occur on the western side and also on the eastern side. And I expect that to continue because it's under very favorable conditions at this point. The wind shear is light, and tropical cyclones need as little wind shear as possible to develop and rapidly develop, because if there's a lot of wind shear, that the strong upper level winds and the change in wind direction is going to divert the latent heat into another place that's outside of the eye, and in general that's going to weaken the storm if it doesn't have enough latent heat circulating the center of circulation. However, the wind shear is light at this point, and also there isn't a lot of dry air. There's a little bit of dry air towards Florida, but obviously it isn't enough to hinder this storm from developing. And plus, it's currently over upper 80-degree water to lower 90-degree water, so it's pretty much under all the favorable conditions for this storm to continue to develop. And not only that, the water temperature is very warm. There's a lot of upper ocean heat content, and what that means is that there's a lot of heat in with depth in the Gulf of Mexico water. It isn't like only the first couple of feet of the Gulf of Mexico that's warm. We go hundreds of feet deep. The Gulf of Mexico goes hundreds of feet deep with temperatures around the 80-degree water range. So this has a lot of moisture that Laura could pretty much fuel off of over the next several days, and that's why rapid intensification is expected to occur as it approaches Louisiana and the Texas coast over the next several days. And to show you the lack of wind shear, you see that currently Laura is under very light wind shear at this point, with the upper level winds only blowing around only 5 knots, and that's very weak wind shear for tropical cyclones, as tropical cyclones are known to develop with weak upper level winds like that. And you might point out that there is wind shear towards Louisiana and Texas, which could weaken it as it approaches the coast. However, that wind shear is expected to lighten down, especially as this ridge continues to build over the southeast United States. Because if we take a look at the GFS model, this currently, as of right now, the millibar pressure is a little lower than this, but for the most part, the GFS is pretty much spot on with the location and nearly the strength of the storm. If we continue to move forward, you see a strong wind shear over the Texas coast. However, moving forward, you begin to see that wind shear moves a little bit further north, so there's a little bit more of an open lane for Hurricane Laura to continue to rapidly develop just before it makes landfall between either on the Louisiana coast or the Texas coast over the next several days. And that's definitely worrying because the GFS at this point is currently bringing Hurricane Laura's peak intensity at 961 millibars, and that's equivalent to a Category 3 major hurricane. And major hurricanes are known to cause extensive damage. They bring billions of dollars in damages for whoever lies in its path, and a lot of times they're unfortunately deadly. So Category 3 hurricane potentially making landfall between Louisiana and Texas is definitely not something you can't take seriously, because this could be an extremely strong storm, and I wouldn't rule out the possibility this could become a Category 4 hurricane before it makes landfall, because we've seen hurricanes that rapidly intensify and go well above the intensity forecast, like Hurricane Michael, which I think Hurricane Michael was originally forecast to make landfall like only 2 days before at maybe a Category 2 or Category 3. However, Hurricane Michael rapidly intensified so much it made landfall as a Category 5 near Panama City, Florida, back in October of 2018. So while the intensity forecast is currently forecasting this to become, while it's still bad, it's forecasting this to become a major hurricane, I wouldn't rule out that this could become as high as a Category 4. I won't say for certain that this will rapidly intensify into a Category 5 like Michael, because that's still a little bit too far-fetched. However, you definitely don't want to rule out any sort of possibilities just yet, since the intensity forecast could be could change very quickly, and you definitely want to prepare as if a Category 5 is heading towards your doorstep in Louisiana and Texas, because I've experienced this firsthand where tropical cyclones that most forecast models don't really forecast as becoming as intensifying as fast as they do. They do sometimes and could go up to Category 4, like Hurricane Harvey as well. I think was originally supposed to make landfall just days before as a Category 2, made landfall as a Category 4, and it's the second most costliest disaster in U.S. history. So prepare for this as if this is a Category 5 hurricane for Louisiana and Texas. And in terms of the forecast track, where this could potentially go, it all depends really on the ridge of high pressure that's expected to build right around the southeast Gulf of Mexico, because you see that. So the ridge is expected to build in the southeast, and it really all depends on the angle that this ridge builds at, because if it builds a little bit more and this ridge over the southeast is a little bit stronger, that'll not only the low level flow of this high pressure system would steer Laura more towards Texas, more towards the western track, but also it'll force these upper level winds that are currently over Texas and Louisiana to move more up northwards, and that'll pretty much allow Laura to pretty much take a much more westward track. If that were the case, if this high pressure builds a little bit more to the west and it builds a little bit stronger. However, if this ridge is a little weaker, then not only the low level flow will pretty much steer Laura more towards the east, it will also, the wind shear is more likely to be over Texas and Louisiana, which would definitely force this to take that turn up northward a little bit sooner, to where Louisiana may experience more impact. So it all depends on how this ridge builds over the next several days, because that's going to be important on what determines the future of this track. However, I will say with confidence that Louisiana and Texas will experience impacts from this, and hurricane impacts are pretty much guaranteed at this point. And even as far east as Mississippi will experience storm surge impacts. So prepare now if you're along the extreme eastern portions of the Texas coast, and pretty much all throughout the Louisiana coast, and even as far east as Mississippi, since we know that the eastern portion of every tropical cyclone is always the strongest, it has the largest wind field. So those impacts could extend as far east as Mississippi and maybe even Alabama, depending on where exactly this could go, because the eastern portion of every tropical cyclone has a large wind field, and that's gonna affect a lot of people, pretty much the entire state of Louisiana, even if the eye makes landfall far to the west of you guys, maybe near New Orleans or Baton Rouge. So definitely prepare now all along the Louisiana and Mississippi coast for hurricane impacts, as well as western Texas, and even Houston needs to be paying a close eye on this storm. And in terms of the storm surge that's expected over the next several days, we have So we have a forecast of 9 to 13 feet along the western coast along the western coast of Louisiana, and that's huge. 9 to 13 feet of storm surge. Usually during tropical cyclones, I typically see something like 4 to 6, maybe 6 to 8 in some of the worst ones, but to see a forecast of 9 to 13 feet, that's an insane amount of storm surge. And to pretty much fathom how much storm surge that is, pretty much put your hand up 9 to 13 feet, and that's how much water could be along the coast in these regions as Hurricane Laura. I keep saying tropical storm Laura, but as Hurricane Laura makes landfall along the Louisiana coast. So if you know you're right along the coast, you need to take major precaution and definitely evacuate, because the leading cause of death during tropical cyclones are from storm surge. And 9 to 13 feet, that's just insane that to see. And even extending far east, 7 to 11 feet, that's still a pretty high storm surge threat for the I would say the middle coast of Louisiana, and even 4 to 6 towards the southeastern portion of Louisiana, and 2 to 4 feet is expected right around the Louisiana area and extending as far east as Mississippi, and even towards the western portion. Even though the winds will be pretty much, if this storm were to make landfall right around the Louisiana-Texas border, while the winds will be coming from the north, essentially pushing the water away from the coast, still 3 to 5 feet of storm surge is expected right around Galveston Bay, 6 to 9, a little bit more eastward of that, and 2 to 4 feet. And even with 2 to 4 feet, that's still a lot of storm surge, because you have to keep in mind, it only takes 2 feet of water to completely move a car. But in some areas, we're talking about 9 to 13 feet, which is just huge. And I emphasize to take precaution all throughout the coast, because this could be a major event. And unfortunately, if people don't take enough precautions, we may see deaths, and we definitely do not want to see that along the coast. And the other threat as well is going to be rainfall, where 6 to 10 inches are likely all throughout the Louisiana-Texas border, and then extending a little bit further east to Louisiana, where 2 to 4 inches are expected, and then 1 to 2 inches are expected even eastward of that throughout Mississippi. And this rainfall even extends far inland, where in Arkansas you could experience 6 to 10 inches. So just because you're not along the coast does not mean you'll be out of the woods, as inland flooding is definitely going to be likely all across Arkansas and Louisiana, and also will be a concern for Texas, as you guys will experience heavy rainfall as well, especially towards the eastern border of this. And this could quickly change depending on how far east or how far west this storm goes, because it can make a major difference in terms of storm surge forecasts and the amount of rainfall you'll experience. So you definitely need to pay attention to your local forecast over the next several days and see how Hurricane Laura moves, because this could be a lot worse than what the current forecast is, since any change between miles will make a huge difference when it comes to impacts. However, I advise that throughout Texas, throughout Louisiana, and even as far east as Mississippi, prepare now as if a Category 5 hurricane is coming, because while only a Category 3 is forecast, the thing is that Category 3 hurricanes are still major. They still cause a ton of damage. And plus, based off of my experience, when we're talking about a rapidly intensifying storm, it's very difficult for the forecast models to really fathom how much a storm could rapidly intensify. And I wouldn't be surprised if we could see a Category 4 come Thursday, as the storm is expected to make landfall right around that time frame. So definitely keep that in mind, and stay prepared all throughout the southeast coast. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more content, and make sure to share with friends and family who are interested and who need to hear this. And I hope you guys have a good day.